Hello and welcome to the Origins of Islam. In our quest to uncover the changing nature of the Quran, today we want to look at the Sira Quran feedback, or at how the biography of the Prophet itself has influenced the Quran. The earliest biography of Muhammad was supposedly written by Ibn Ishaq around 760 AD. Now I'm aware that there are a lot of questions about Ibn Ishaq, whether he really existed, whether it was a collective of writers, or if he was just made up by Ibn Hisham. While a lot of these questions can't be answered, the evidence points to Ibn Hisham actually having worked with an original source from the 8th century. So that's what we're going to refer to as Ibn Ishaq. Whether there really was an Ibn Ishaq or not really doesn't matter for our analysis at this point. Now, Ibn Ishaq quotes 400 continuous verses from 7 surahs. Within those 400 verses, 53 verses are missing. These verses were likely later additions to the Quran. How do we know that? Because not only does Ibn Ishaq quote those continuous verses from the Quran, he also makes it explicitly clear when he's jumping over certain verses. So if he's quoting in sequence several verses, and if he doesn't mention that he's jumping over verses, but verses are missing, we can assume that Ibn Ishaq was not aware of those missing verses. For example, let's look at Surah 48 verses 28 and 29. Ibn Ishaq's discussion of Surah 48 ends with verse 27. Now verse 29 is an unusually long verse, and if you remember the very first episode which we did on the origins of Islam, I already mentioned how a very long verse following a bunch of short verses is a sure sign for a later interpolation. Now the interesting part is, in a completely different context, when discussing Surah 2, 103, regarding the hypocrites and the Jews, Ibn Ishaq quotes a letter which Muhammad supposedly wrote to the Jews explaining the verse in question. So the verse in question is Surah 2, 103. Quote, "And if they had believed and feared Allah, then the reward from Allah would have been far better, if only they knew." End quote. And lo and behold, Surah 48, 29, so one of those two missing verses, is taken verbatim from the letter quoted by Ibn Ishaq. So here we have an example of a feedback, where the Sira, which was written to provide context for the Quran, as we've seen in the last episode, itself influenced the contents of the Quran. A passage written as an explanation for Surah 2, 103 ends up becoming Surah 48, verse 29. Now, in al-Waqidi's biography of the Prophet Muhammad, which was written roughly around 810 AD, verse 29 is already included, but verse 28 is still missing. Verse 28 reads as follows: "It is he who sent his messenger with guidance and the religion of truth to manifest it over all religion, and sufficient is Allah as witness." This is taken from an Umayyad era coin, which was minted around 697 AD, which says, "Muhammad is the messenger of God, sent with guidance and the religion of truth to manifest it over all religion." Of course, when the coin was minted, this was probably read as "Praised be the messenger of God" and not as "Muhammad is the messenger of God." But when this verse was added, by that time, Muhammad was firmly established as the Prophet of Islam. If you look at these two quotes again, one from verse 28 and one from the coin, one thing that is of course interesting is the subtle differences. Now, if Surah 48:28 was already part of the Quran before the coin in question was minted, as the standard Islamic narrative would have it, then it would be inconceivable that the text of the Quran would be altered in such a way as it is now visible on the coin. It's the word of God after all. You can't just change it when minting a coin. However, if the coin precedes the verse in the Quran, then it can be explained, because the following verse 29 starts out with the phrase, "Muhammad is the messenger of God." Having it twice in a row would sound strange. Instead, the editors completed the quote from the coin by inserting the remainder before verse 29. Another example is Surah 9:40. This surah narrates a passage of Muhammad's biography where he and Abu Bakr hide in a cave during their flight from Mecca to Medina. It is one of the very few passages within the Quran where Muhammad clearly talks about an event in his life within the Quran. This passage has also been added between 760 and 810 AD. It is not present in Ibn Ishaq, but it is present in al-Waqidi. Other examples are multiple verses regarding the pilgrimage in Surahs 2, 5, 14, 22 and 48. These passages are first found in the Sira. Only later do commentators refer to these verses. So here we have something along the lines of the letter of Ibn Ishaq's biography, which later became a verse in the Quran. Now let's look at the story of Zayd and Zainab. Muhammad's adopted son, Zayd, is married to Zainab. In Surah 33, 36 to 38, it is described that Zaid is unhappy with his marriage. Muhammad falls for Zainab but tells Zaid to keep her. God reveals to Muhammad that he should marry Zainab. Zaid divorces her so that she can marry again. Elements of verse 37 are taken verbatim from Muqatil ibn Sulaiman's tafsir, which was written around 760 AD. According to Islamic tradition, Muhammad's companion Anas ibn Malik, as well as Jews and even polytheists, complained, quote, "Muhammad has married the wife of his son at the same time that he forbids us to do the same." End quote. Strangely, Surah 4 verse 23 seems to allow the marriage to the wife of an adopted son, as it only prohibits marriage to the wife of a natural son. This indicates that Surah 4 verse 23 was altered at a later point in time to conform with Surah 33 verse 37 once it was added. And here I've tried to visualize this connection. So Surah 33:37 was added. "We gave her to you in marriage, the wives of their adopted sons." This addition necessitated a change in Surah 4:23. "Prohibited to you are the wives of your sons who are from your loins." So your natural born sons, not your adopted sons. In the next episode, we will have a closer look at the story of Zaid and how his narrative was a crucial part in turning Muhammad from a prophet into the seal of all prophets. Until then, thank you very much for watching and see you next time.